Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Refurbishment Mastery podcast, where I'm delighted to introduce you to and welcome back a good friend of mine, Suzanne Elsey. Members of my community will have heard Suzanne speak already. She joined us on one of the weekly Q&A sessions, and actually I had some amazing feedback. I have to say, well done to Suzanne, because I think it was probably the one episode or the one Q&A session that elicited the most positive feedback, and how excited everyone was by what you were speaking about. So as a result of the success of that, I'm delighted to welcome Suzanne to the podcast and share her experience, her knowledge of how she adds value to property, and indeed from what she's talking about today, how you can learn to add that same kind of value. So thank you very much for joining me, Suzanne. I'm going to pass over to you and let everyone listen to your introduction, how you came into property, how you came to be doing what you're doing, and how you add value to property for so many people as well as yourself.
Oh, thank you, Martin. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on. I know it's so wonderful to hear that you got lovely feedback. So thank you for that. I'm really passionate about this topic, as you know, because I talk about it all the time. And it's made such a difference for people with their property, how they live in it, but also how much value gets added. So really happy to share some tips and advice and what people should look for with you today. So for your listeners, just to give a little bit of background about me, I've been an interior designer for 30 plus years. It makes me feel very old when I say that. However, I've been doing this a long time, and my company's I started in 2009 furnishing interiors, and I've worked with developers, investors, a lot of residential clients and landlords, basically to add value to their property and enhance their lives. Also worked for a boutique hotel and done a few bits of commercial work too. But my passion really is in residential properties, because I know it makes such a difference to people. So what people don't often realise is an internal layout can be changed. So whether it's an existing building or whether it is looking at plans for a new building or an extension, for example, people don't see necessarily beyond what's in front of them. And that's not a bad thing at all, but it's just really to make people aware that they can be changed. Yes, you might need some structural work, and you'll need to get professionals to check certain things. So whether that's an architect making sure the room sizes fit the requirements, or whether it's a structural engineer to say you need a steel of this size going in here, you will need to get other professionals involved in most instances. And certainly if you're changing anything on the exterior of a building, there might be planning, etc. involved. However, a lot of changes can be quite simple, but actually give, give a really good result for not actually much difference in cost. So I thought I would talk you through just some different ways that you can review your layouts in order to make those considered decisions, if you like, about what could potentially be changed. So I'm going to talk about a few case studies. If you want to check out the actual layout so that visibly you can see them, then you can pop onto my social channels, etc., where they are featured. But just to talk you through a few highlights, I've done lots of properties over the years, and quite often when you walk into a property, I personally can see how people are using that space, and quite often you will find rooms that are poorly laid out or oversized or undersized, and then another room potentially is the reverse. So quite often, by reappointing the rooms and flipping things around, you can actually make that room more livable and make better use of the space. So in one example, you get quite often rooms that are living rooms that are quite long and thin, and that can be quite difficult to place furniture, because you feel like you're really far away from people when you're sitting down, or you can't fit the furniture in because you've got two lots of doors and you're walking through things and walking around furniture. So always try and start with the end in mind. How are you going to use the space? What's going to make it more appealing? Can you fit what you need in the room? So for example, if it's a family home that you're creating, will you be able to fit enough seating in there for everybody to sit down, or are you going to end up with like a two-seater sofa and a chair, because that's not going to work in that environment? So it's always thinking about the end, you know, who's your demographic, who's going to live there, what do they require? And if you start with the end in mind and work back, that is actually a really good way of making sure the requirements are there, because that's going to be what makes the property sell quicker, rent quicker. If you're renting it, less voids, because people are living there in a way that makes them want to stay. So for example, one of my clients had an L-shaped living room. The previous owner had basically made it bigger by putting a very square extension on the back. And they lived in 1/3 of that whole space, because that's where the fireplace was. So two parts of that room, one was a walk-through, literally because there were two lots of double doors. And then the back end, which had the nice views of the garden, they just didn't use at all because they had a separate dining room. So by taking the fireplace out from where it was and positioning it on, you still had to have a walkthrough, but by positioning the fireplace that side, I can swing all the furniture around so it's facing the other way, move it all into the centre a little bit more, have some seating in the other area, and they've got this really spacious living room now, still the L shape, but it's been reappointed so that they can actually use that space much better, and it now suits their family needs, because as much as there was only 5 of them living in the home with adult children, they had a large family that would come round and socialise together, and they would entertain. So they needed the seating and they had the room for it. It was just all squashed into one part. So even, you know, things like that can enhance how people are living and using their space. With regards to one of my recent developments, because we've got a development company as well as my interior design company. So I've been developing for 5 years, and my development company is Link ID Limited. With that, we actually buy land or property to develop it and add lots of value. So one of the recent ones was land with planning already. It was 4-bedroom detached houses, 2 of those, and the plans were approved. We bought it with the permission. But actually, when you looked at the plans, you've got this beautiful, like, 4-bedroom detached house, and the architect, for some reason, had designed it that you walked through the front door into a very small sort of hallway, which wasn't really a hallway, it was a rectangular shape with another door into this massive hallway space. Now, the problem with that is you walk into this tiny space, it's a family home, and if you've got children that you're carrying, for example, or bags of shopping that you're bringing in, you suddenly walk into this door into a tiny space. It's not giving you that wow when you walk in off of the driveway. So I knew I wanted to take that out and change that. But also the hallway itself was really big, which would be very dramatic if you wanted that sort of stately home feel, very sort of grand, if you like. But the problem was this house didn't have a utility room. There was nowhere to put all of the cylinder, boiler, underfloor heating manifolds, fuse board, because they put the staircase in, again, was quite grand. So there was no space there to actually house all this stuff, and you don't want that in the kitchen. I've got a real bugbear about washing machines in kitchens. I try and get them out, even if it's in a cupboard, just take them out and keep them separate, because no one wants to hear that rattling around when you're in the kitchen, or have dirty washing on the floor because you're sorting it into your colours and whites and stuff. So I always try and get a utility space in wherever I can. And by reconfiguring that layout, I was actually able to put a utility room in downstairs, which obviously adds value. And the room at the back, which was originally kitchen and dining, and with this long, almost like carriage-like living space with double doors into it, just wasn't particularly practical, because all the walls were doors. You had bifold doors, you had a door into the kitchen from the hall, and then your doors from the living room into the dining area. So there actually wasn't many walls that you could put anything on. So by eliminating a set of double doors and just pinching a bit of space out of the living room, I was able to actually create that room at the back, so that it had the kitchen with space for the dining room on one side, and then another living area on the other side. So suddenly you've gone from a ground floor having no utility room and just one living room, to having an open plan living space at the back with seating, as well as a separate lounge. So you've instantly added value. The footprint of the property is exactly the same, but it's just where you're putting the actual walls change. And because we are taking the double doors out, and by moving the other door along a little bit, it actually gave you much more space to actually put the living room furniture in there. So it didn't feel so long and thin, and the furniture wasn't sort of all pushed up one end, or you were walking around it. So just, again, they're quite small changes to those plans, but it's actually added so much value to that property. Upstairs, the way it was drawn, it was a nice 4-bedroom with a bathroom and an ensuite upstairs. However, there was nowhere to put a wardrobe. So because you were either blocking a window, or the door was in the way, or it would hit on bedside tables. So again, by just making a few easy changes as to where the walls were placed, it was actually a much bigger bathroom, with no detriment to the bedrooms at all. And we gained a walk-in wardrobe in the master bedroom, as well as making sure every room had good storage, because storage is a really key thing for people. Everyone has stuff, whether it's clothes, bags, Christmas decorations, suitcases, you name it. It could be handbags or shoes. But ultimately, people need places to put their things. I've gone into so many new builds over the years, working with developers and coming in and doing show flats and thinking, well, where's everyone going to put their stuff? You know, you can't even fit a single door wardrobe in here. And you just sort of think, well, actually, if just a few changes and move that around slightly, and you could have actually had really decent, you know, wardrobes or cupboards in here. So I'm really passionate about trying to make the most of every available square metre that you absolutely can, but also that it flows well, so that people can put storage in, they can live their lives really well, and make those properties add more value when you get your valuations. And that's something that's been consistent over the years, is yes, they're spending money, which they're going to spend anyway doing a refurb. Even if you don't change anything, by refurbishing it and making it look nicer, you make it look nicer, but you're not necessarily making it work well for people, and that can still put people off when they're viewing. So it is something that can be very easily spotted, but people don't necessarily know they can make those changes. So it's really just to run through things like that. And I have my success guide, which gives some tips that people can obviously look at and work out, well, does that apply or not? So they can, review it themselves. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And just to really clarify for listeners that if you've got planning permission to build a 4-bedroom house, as long as you still only build a 4-bedroom house, there's no real requirement for you to build the layout that the planning permission was gained on. And some architects are purely given a brief, get me planning permission for a 4-bedroom house. It's not get me the best 4-bedroom house, it's get me planning permission on a 4-bedroom house, because I know I can sell the land with the planning permission and I can benefit from that uplift. So the architects, in some cases, haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. The brief was get me planning, and they've done that. So don't be afraid to reconfigure. I've reconfigured even within blocks of flats. I've reconfigured party walls to get better layouts of properties, and to some extent even mix the properties up a little bit. It feels obvious that if we're going to build 8 flats, we build 8 flats identical, 4 on the left of the staircase and 4 on the right. But actually, if you move those party walls a little bit, you might be able to get 4 nice 2-bedrooms on one side and 4 1-bedrooms on the other side, rather than some mediocre something in the middle. So yeah, again, don't be afraid. As Suzanne said, you've got to speak to the professionals, the architects and the structural engineers. But a lot of this doesn't actually cost a great deal. What's your thoughts, Suzanne, on when we finished a property, actually staging it with furniture on it? Is that something you do?
Yeah, it is. I've done that a lot for developers over the years, and the main thing you're trying to do is create a home they aspire to, because ultimately, whether they're tenants, whether they're people on holiday in serviced accommodation, whether it's a HMO or whether it's a buy-to-let or your own home, it is all about their lifestyle. So what you're trying to do is appeal to what you think your main demographic aspires to. So that's the aim of the property, is to draw them in and make them want to live there. Now, the best way of doing that is to pull in all the furniture that shows the space can handle let's say it's a 2-bedroom flat, for example. You can fit double beds in each bedroom rather than a double and a single, for example. But actually, you might have a bed and a bedside table with some lamps on it, and that just shows the space is big enough. It doesn't create a lifestyle. So the difference between furnishing something and having a show flat is the accessories, artwork, mirrors, those small touches, dressing the bed well. A lot of men hate cushions. They're like, oh, I'll just throw them on the floor. There's no point having them. But you are aspiring to a lifestyle. So adding colour onto the bed brings everything together, as do the accessories, whether that's rugs, lamps, even down to, on a bedside table, I will put books, because you can almost imagine yourself getting into bed and reading a book, So having the dining room table dressed with the dining accessories, so plates, glasses, knives and forks, the decoration in the middle, whatever that looks like, and you can really go to town on the dining room tables alone. I do napkins. I always try and do napkins in all different ways, so that they're all different. I have a lot of fun doing that. So again, it's almost like, oh, I'm just about to entertain people, and it's all like dressed ready for someone to come round. So it's all about aspiring people to want to live there. So having some nice flowers or plants, you can do it in many ways, and obviously it's about styling it to suit the property, to suit the people going in there. So whether you go modern, traditional, whether you're going something more sort of industrial, urban, that will depend on the demographic, and the colours will depend on the type of light coming in and what you're trying to present the ambience you want to get. So there's a lot of things to consider, but the mistake people make when they're putting rooms together and they think that, you know, just putting furniture in and maybe one piece of artwork and they're done. Actually, just by going a little bit further, you can just elevate how that looks. And actually that adds a lot of value, especially if the property is a bit quirky, or it's got a horrible view, or it's, you know, maybe not in such an attractive area, or there's a lot of property similar locally. And if you want to get a higher rent, for example, or you're trying to sell at a higher value, that can make the difference. I had really great testimonial back from an estate agent that used to give me a lot of work. And he said that by putting in the show flats, they, on one particular site where they had about 30 properties, we did one show flat, and the majority of them sold on their launch day. So much faster sale process, but it also added 15% on the ceiling of the area because of it being furnished. So it can be really, really impactful, and it can get you more money than your competitors potentially locally. So it just raises the ceiling that you can get.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with all of that. We're right in the process of refurbishing a two-bedroom flat at the moment. In fact, we are at staging position here. Now, a lot of the staging we've bought has actually come from charity shops. There are some new things in there, because you can't always stage from a charity shop. But for us, this is win-win. We buy things from the charity shop. They deliver it all. We increase our value. We've got a valuation booked for next week, so the value will come. Hopefully, believe that it's worth a little bit more than our competitors. We'll then stage it or we'll leave it to be rented out, and tenants will look at it, and hopefully they'll be prepared to just pay a little bit more, and that's course a little bit more every single month. And then we'll phone the charity shop back up, and they can come and collect it and sell it to someone else. So it's a kind of win-win all round. Be careful with the quality. We picked up an enormous picture for £5. Now, it was an enormous picture, but we've got an enormous long wall with a chimney, with a fireplace in the middle of it. And it was like, that needs a big picture. And there it was. There was the big picture we needed. It cost us £5. And as Suzanne said, I've always believed it adds good value. What's your thoughts on colours, Suzanne? What kind of colours are in vogue at the moment, and should we be thinking about?
It varies all the time. I mean, the greys are still with us, so as base tones, but avoid going overly grey, because what you tend to find is someone will latch onto grey and then everything's grey.
Yeah.
So I really like adding pops of colour. So I probably go against the grain a little bit with most interior designers. If you are looking to sell or to rent unfurnished, you want to appeal to as many people as possible. So by going for funky colours and funky wallpapers, and which all, you know, especially wallpaper will cost you more money when you're refurbing, you actually can turn people off of the property because it's not to their taste. So by keeping it relatively neutral in those situations, but having nice quality. So for example, don't go for a cheap £7 a metre carpet. Spend a little bit more on the carpet and go for something more luxurious with decent, like 10mm underlay underneath it, so it feels all nice and bouncy and really lovely, rather than something really hard and horrible and flat. By doing that, again, you're adding to the quality of the property, but you're keeping it neutral enough that they can imagine living there if it's unfurnished. So by doing that, it's going to save you a bit of money. You can furnish it whether you do it with a show flat, but it's all things you can take out again. So you're adding the colour and the interest in artwork, mirror, texture, and the colours you bring in the accessories themselves, which are all removable. So I tend to avoid going for anything too dramatic on things that cost money to change. So on your walls, on your floors, those sorts of things. I try and go for things that have longevity as well. When you're doing things like HMOs and service accommodation, it's a bit like a show flat. You're again creating an environment people want to live in or spend time in. So there you can be more creative, and you can bring in colours, and you can bring in, you know, different themes in, etc. I also very much think about the light when I'm choosing colours, because the light you have coming into a room in a north facing room will be very different to a south facing room. So in a north facing room, it's going to be dark, and most people will think you've got to go for a light colour. But actually, sometimes it's nice to embrace the darkness, because it can give you a really sort of dramatic feel, or it can be very cozy. So by embracing a richer colour, sometimes actually makes that room feel more enticing, rather than just go, oh, it's got to be white because I need to make it as light as possible, which may be what's wanted, and it might suit the room, because something like a bedroom or a dining room or a lounge could be quite nice if it feels more intimate. Whereas if it's your kitchen, you might want it to be as light as possible, but good lighting obviously can counteract that as well. So the colours I will try to think about in terms of, well, who's the demographic? Is it in a location that you want to pick up on a colour? So for example, is it in a nice sort of rural area that it might be nice to bring in a little bit of the natural colours, like the greens and those sorts of colours? Has it got a bit of heritage around it? So for example, we did a pub conversion where I changed all the layouts, etc. But because that pub had a bit of heritage behind it, their colours were green and gold. I wanted to bring the green and gold through, even though it was never going to be a pub again. I wanted to keep the heritage of those colours. So I picked out gold handles and accessories for all the hardware, so the bathrooms and kitchen handles, internal door handles, all of that sort of thing was in this nice matte gold, which is trendy at the moment. Obviously, I don't know how far in advance this podcast will be. It might not be trendy when you listen to it later on. And I was able to bring in the greens in the show flat, but the walls were kept quite neutral. And the floor, I went for a herringbone rather than a straight plank, and nice luxurious carpets, which were in a greyish colour, which is a warm grey, which is a good colour to go for. Some people are actually put off by grey because they find it quite cold, and actually prefer warmer colours. So this sort of mix of beige and grey can be quite a nice colour to go for, and it's neutral as well. But you'll find trends change, and I think you can keep up with the trends, but then you tend to be changing it more frequently. So things like bathrooms, you'll have some trend in a tile, but suddenly when you look at it 2 years later, you go, oh, that's a bit dated now because it's from 2 years ago or 5 years ago. So again, with bathrooms, I try to go for things that are fairly natural, so natural stones and things like that, because they tend not to date, and black and white is really good in a bathroom because, again, it tends not to date. So, I mean, you can look at a few bathrooms now and you go into them and you just think, oh, yeah, that was from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, because that was the trend at the time. So, yeah, trying to think about things like that, really.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think something that's come across a couple of times in what Suzanne said here is about planning and thinking for the future. We shouldn't be refurbishing our properties just thinking about, well, I've got to get a builder in and plan as we go. Slow down a little bit. Think about the long-term game. You know, if you're going to hold this property for many years, you don't want to be changing the colours every 3 years because something you've selected has gone out of style. So some of the colours that Suzanne spoke about, you know, if you want to maximise the value, you don't work out the better layout after the builder's started. you actually do that process. You plan things, you work with an architect or a designer before the build work starts, and you add the value at that stage. And you'd have heard me say many times before, slow down to speed up, start with the end in mind. This is all about planning. And much of what Suzanne's spoken about in this episode is very much about what I advocate, which is slow down to speed up a little bit, and ultimately earn more in the longer term in your valuations. Even if it's only £10 a month more from your rent, tenants are going to be there for a long time. That £10, those £10 mount up. So you can see it doesn't take long before you're seeing the value of just spending a little bit more time thinking about things. What just thinking about closing this off, or something I just wanted to get your thoughts on, Suzanne, is the next 12 months. Where do you see the property market, the development market going in the next 12 months, and what are you going to be doing for the next 12 months?
That's a really interesting question, because obviously it's quite uncertain for people currently. I think the majority of people are quite scared about how it is and are just waiting to see what happens. But I think those that have the understanding of property and know that it's a long-term strategy are not put off by it at all. So I think there's lots of buildings out there that can actually be brought back to life, repurposed. Going back to your charity shop comment, I love being able to actually improve something that's already there. There's so many dilapidated buildings that would be wonderful to actually bring back to life. And at the end of the day, we're a small island and there's demand for property, so that market has to keep going. And I think the changes that the government are bringing in at the moment, I think actually should ultimately make certain things easier. I'm hoping, certainly on the new build side of things, it would be nice if that is helped a little bit. But I think wherever you can upcycle, reuse, be a little bit more environmentally friendly, all of the green energy stuff, I think we need to just embrace that. And try to bring that in wherever we possibly can. Ultimately, it's energy saving for the people that are going to live there, so it makes it appealing. One of our developments, the one I was explaining about the layouts, it's actually an A-rated EPC, which is really, really unusual.
Yeah.
With solar panels and air-sourced heat pump cylinders. And underfloor heating that's powered by those. So it can be quite easy to hit those sort of more sustainable angles. And you can get some amazing bargains in charity shops. I've got bits at home that I've got in the charity shop. It's like amazing.
Yes.
So yeah, there's obviously some things that are not so nice, but actually you can get some really good stuff in there. But it's obviously going to the right places to find it. And they might not necessarily have something when you need it. That's the other thing. But I think there's so many opportunities for people. Whatever your property strategy is, I think as long as you're doing the right things, which is really, finding those good deals, then ultimately you're going to make a success of that, whatever your plan is. And ultimately, if you can add more money to counteract things like materials going up, labour costs going up, interest rates going up, if you can claw back a few extra square metres of habitable space, or just by reviewing a layout and going from a 2-bed to a 3-bed, or a 3-bed to a 4-bed, quite easily without spending a ton of money, suddenly you've added thousands of pounds to that end value. One of the pub conversion we did, we added hundreds of thousands of pounds to the end value, which was needed because it came at a time where the materials was hard to source, and the materials just literally expanded on those costs and soared up, and that actually counteracted that, because you can't always predict these things that happen in the markets. So wherever you can claw back extra money, going back to what you said about the end in mind as well, you can save money typically on things like plug sockets and how many light fittings you put up, because you know where the layouts are. You're not thinking, well, it could be here and it could be there, I'll put them in case. So sometimes people end up with 8 sockets, you know, in a living room. You don't need 8, you can get away with 4. But though that could be a few hundred quid that people are paying for it. And if you're doing that throughout a whole house, you know, it can soon add up. So it's not just about adding value, it's also about saving money in your actual rebuild costs. As you know, it can very easily go over budget. So, which obviously can help with all of that. But yeah, for us, we've got a training course for tradespeople called Trade to Developer. So we are helping more people with that. We've had a lot of success with the people we've mentored through that currently. So we have got a new intake of that coming. We have got developments that we're finishing and starting. We've got one in planning. So hopefully we'll get that come through and be able to get that one started. And our current development we're selling to, keeping some for service accommodation. So we've got all that going on. And then on the layouts, I work with different developers and investors. I've got a few that I'm working with at the moment to obviously get their properties done and, you know, looked at, etc. But yeah, I very rarely find a plan that I can't change in some way, shape or form, whether it's saving money or doing both. So happy for people to challenge me on that one.
Well, super busy as everyone is in property. So yeah, thanks very much for giving up some of your time to have a chat with me today. What's the best way for people to get hold of you? If you're watching this on any video platform, you'll see there's a QR code at the back. But for those that are listening on one of the podcast platforms, what's the best way of getting hold of you?
So email is probably the easiest one to give out over an audio. So that's sales, SALES, at Furnishing Interiors. So furnishing with no S and interiors with an S, and that's .com. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch, or on Facebook, obviously through the business one rather than my personal one, because otherwise they seem to get lost in a funny inbox that you can never find if you're not already friends with someone. So it's better to come through the business socials if you're going to get in touch on the socials.
That's great. And we'll put those links into the show notes as well, so you'll be able to follow those through at any time. So, well, thank you very much for joining me, Suzanne. It's been really great speaking to you this afternoon. I've actually, I knew a lot of what Suzanne was going to talk about, and it complements what I've been saying. So hopefully, if you don't totally believe everything I say, hopefully coming from somewhere else, slow down to speed up, I think is the key thing. Plan in advance. You can earn a lot of money by using your head rather than cutting corners and bodging things. Use your head, plan well, and you can add some great value to property. So thanks very much, Suzanne. Thanks very much for joining me today. And I look forward to catching up with you all very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.